Welcome to Brooklane's Facebook Live presentation, helping our teens navigate the evolving changes of the pandemic. I'm Kurt Miller, Community Relations and Education Manager at Brooklane. As the pandemic lingers and constantly changes, so does the stress of coping with its challenges. The pandemic has been disruptive to so many people, and students are no exception. From the virtual learning to being back in classrooms, many teens have been more isolated and anxious. Students report feeling more sad and hopeless. Today's program focuses on understanding young people as well as ways to reduce stress and cope better with the evolving changes. For information on our future programs, please visit brooklane.org. You will also find recordings of our Facebook Live programs on our YouTube channel, which you can access from our website. These are videos that offer a variety of information on mental health topics. If you have any questions during the program today, please type them into the comments area and I will relay them to our speaker. Thanks again for joining us. Our Facebook Live program today is presented by Susan Corley. She's a licensed clinical social worker providing outpatient therapy at Brooklane's North Village office. Susan received her master's degree in social work from the University of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She's been employed with Brooklane for nearly 22 years and has presented community education programs as well as professional seminars. Susan, thank you so much for being with us here this evening.
Thank you, Kurt. And I want to welcome everyone to the Facebook Live this evening. We are talking about our teens, and we're talking about the pandemic and everything that they've been through and how we can continue to help them navigate this entire situation. We are now almost, actually 2+ years into the COVID pandemic, and it has affected everyone's lives. I can honestly say that we've been living through unprecedented times, that we've been experiencing things that most of us, and I can say as an adult, things that I would have never imagined would happen in my lifetime. We know that things happen. We've heard about them over time in history. We heard about the Spanish influenza. We heard about how it affected our world back then. But to imagine that something like that could happen again and have it actually happen, I don't think any of us could have been prepared for it. And oftentimes people refer to it as the storm in our life. Everybody's in this storm. However, our experiences, each of us, and how we handle it is completely different. So I want you to take a minute, tears into the pandemic now, and think about, so how are you really doing with all of this? As an adult, maybe there's some teens on here this evening, maybe there's some teachers, maybe there's some counselors, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings. I'm not sure who else in our population, but I want to welcome you all and I want you to think about how this pandemic is affecting you. I want to kind of talk about several different things as we talk about helping them navigate this challenge. I think that important information in terms of why am I interested in how it affects our teenagers? Why is that so important to me? And why do I want to help people understand that? Part of that has to do with their brain development and their actual developmental stage that they're in life. I want to look at how stress affects them and how it affects them differently than an adult, because the pandemic brought a lot of stress to everyone, adults and young people alike, even our youngest kids in society. I want to talk a little bit about some things that we're noticing mental health trend-wise. Before the pandemic, we were starting to see a trend of more young people needing assistance. More young people were showing up in emergency rooms with crises going on with mental health. The pandemic exacerbated that, made that worse. So we're going to talk about where are those trends? What are the diagnoses that we're seeing with our young people? I also have information in the USA Today. There was an article regarding a survey that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention did from January of 2021 through until June of 2021, in which they looked at how the pandemic was affecting our teens. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but I think that I want to bring that up because I found it so interesting that there was an article today on the day that I'm talking to you all about how to help our teens navigate and how this has truly impacted them. I want to just speak to, for parents, your academic folks out there who have been helping your students through this pandemic. It's been challenging for them. It's been a challenge for the mental health field because we've all had to adapt. We've all had to learn how to do things differently. We've had to change up strategies and techniques that we use to make them adaptable to doing them online in Zoom calls or through telehealth. If you've not had the experience of working in telehealth, it is definitely different than being in the office, and you can't see all the nuances. You can see different things, and sometimes it's very frustrating and it's very overwhelming for young people and families to have you be in their home that way when they're used to coming in the office. A lot of times teenagers will say, this doesn't feel as confidential. I don't feel like there's as much privacy. My parents can be on the other side of the wall. They could be on the other side of the door. And I'm going to really encourage, if you're working with your folks and they're at home and they're having telehealth sessions, please give them as much privacy as you can. If your therapist needs you, they're going to ask for you. They're going to ask your teen to have you join them. And you're going to want to communicate with that person outside of the sessions. So we're also going to talk about some strategies, just some common sense things that you can do to help the teens in your life at this point to continue to navigate these changes. We as a country, we as a profession, our educators, everyone in the world, we've kind of been building the bridge as we're crossing it when it comes to this pandemic and learning to do some things differently. Let's talk a second about our teens and, their brains being under construction. The teenage years are some of the biggest growth years in terms of gray matter in the brain. Their brains by the ages, girls 11, boys 14, are at the biggest size that they're going to be. However, they're maturing and the matter within their brain continues to grow well into their middle to late 20s. And the last part of their brain that comes online is their prefrontal cortex. If you look at what the prefrontal cortex does, it has to do with time management, prioritizing, decision-making, emotion regulation, impulse control. It's all those major, what we call executive functioning skills that we see adults do all the time, like being flexible, being able to adapt to things, being able to figure out what you need to do next, come up with a goal, strategize, plan, implement. It's all of that. So if you look at that part of their brain is not fully developed yet, it's no wonder that they've been impacted significantly by the stress of the pandemic. It's also important to remember as you're looking at their brain development, they are pretty resilient. So if you hear teenagers now that they're back in school talking about, they're getting back to what feels more normal to them, or they're feeling like they're back in their life, and as they get back into activities or their grades start to improve or they start to be back around their friends, that you notice things changing, that's going to be accurate too, because they are resilient. They are learning and adapting all the time because the prefrontal cortex is the last to develop. That's why we see some of the more risky, impulsive behaviors that we see with them. That's why we see the tendency for not thinking before they do things. There's been lots of concerns with parents and people in the community about the amount of social media use, all the sharing that they were doing, all the connecting that they were doing, not necessarily stopping and thinking about what they were doing during the pandemic, whether it was good for them. There was more bullying happened, and that's one of the things that people were saying in the CDC review was that there was more racism being experienced. There was more intimidation of people who are LGBTQ community. And I think that folks were isolated at home. They weren't out spending time with each other. And that made a big difference because then they went into their computers. They went into social media. They were on their phones. They were on gaming systems. Whatever their technological device was, they were using it on a more frequent basis. It's important to remember teenagers are more vulnerable to stress than adults are, and that their brains are changing all the time. Like I said before, they're going through all kinds of emotional changes, physical changes, and social changes. They rely a lot on their peers for, influencing their behavior or sharing ideas with. They are growing independent from their families. And during the pandemic, they've been pulled back away from their friends. Now they're back in school. So we're going to talk about, they've gone through all kinds of changes in the last 2 years. And we as adults, we're going to ebb and flow and we're going to adapt to it. And sometimes how we handle things, especially if we're very stressed, if we're not managing things in life, it's going to reflect on them and they're going to absorb it and then they're going to react. And there's going to be reaction all around between parents and adults, other teens, teens with younger siblings, everyone. I want you to think about what stress does to an adult. For most of us, stress is okay. We all have it. Everybody has some level of stress in their life. And oftentimes stress helps us be motivated, helps us to get things done. Like if there's a deadline, we work to get things done with the deadline. If we need to have our kids ready for school, we get our kids ready for school and out the door. If we're planning a vacation, the stress of that vacation, even though getting things together is fun, it's also stressful to get everybody moving. It helps us get to a goal. The level of stress that everyone, not just teens, everyone has experienced in the last 2 years is what's considered a disruptive level of stress. And that disruptive level of stress has created a negative impact for some people in the quality of their life and their well-being. And that stress then can trickle down, can affect other people and their life and their interactions, their concentration, and their thought process. All people. If you look at how stress specifically affects our teenagers, it can hurt their memory, it can hurt their learning process, it can compromise their immune functioning, it can lead to the creation of a developmental health issue, it can affect their ability to control their emotions, it can affect their sleep and their eating, all those different areas. Our teens have been under a lot, and we want to help them get where they need to be. There's lots of things going on socially with them. They're learning to navigate the world. 2 years ago, in March of 2020, our young people were told, and families, They're going to be at home for 2 weeks. We're going to close schools for 2 weeks, and we went into a society-wide lockdown. That 2 weeks led to a year plus. Most of our young people did not get back in to their academic environment until fall of 2021, which was just recently. A lot of them were still at home. They did transition kids back into school systems in our area, starting late in 2020 and through until everybody got back into school who needed to be there in 2021. There are young people who've been part of a virtual program here in the county that they continue to do so, maybe because of health problems, maybe because of health problems within their family, and those were requested. Across the country, different states, people went back to school at different times. When folks went back to school, they had lots of restrictions on them. You had to maintain a certain distance from your peers. You couldn't hug. You couldn't share food. You could wear a mask all day. Your teachers wore masks all day. And things were very, very restrictive. Now mask mandates for the kids in school are gone. I've been seeing a lot of anxiety with the teenagers that I work with, and I'm hearing it from other people, that not wearing a mask, some people are concerned about not wearing a mask. They're concerned about people saying something to them if they choose to wear a mask, maybe because they themselves have a health issue, or maybe because there's somebody at home that they're trying to protect by wearing a mask. The other thing is that for so long, people have been behind a mask, and people are finally getting to see each other's facial expressions again. We're getting to see what we genuinely look like again. And that's been kind of scary, because teenagers learned that behind that mask, they could kind of mumble to themselves, and they could do whatever facial expression without their eyes, and hoping nobody would see it or nobody would catch it. They could be hidden behind the mask. And now that the mask mandates are going away, we're seeing anxiety with that, about that now we're vulnerable again. We're out there. And as you work with your own teen, family member, friend, remember that they've got a lot of vulnerabilities that they're dealing with, that they're stressed about. School while they were home over the pandemic was a little bit easier for a lot of kids, because teachers had to completely adapt all their academic plans for the end of 2020 and then for the majority of 2021 for virtual schooling. They went from being in person in a building, and everybody had to very quickly shift to be able to work from home, with lots of young people without the resources at home to have the internet for a long period of time. And if school was stressful for them, they just wouldn't turn on their camera, or they just wouldn't participate in school, or they would just check out. And that created stress for families and how to deal with that, because they were trying to help them be online and be educated. Students that struggle in school, some of them hated virtual learning because they couldn't communicate with their teachers. Their teachers had lots of people that they had to interact with on a daily basis. And if they got behind or they didn't understand something, a lot of them were giving up if they didn't know how to ask the right questions. Some of them felt like they did lose essential learning time. They did learn that they were losing some skills that they needed for when they got back into the school building. So as they've gotten back into the school building, there's been a struggle for some teens, not all, to get back into the flow of academics, to get back into the expectation of being in the classroom, and back into the expectation that academics are going to continue to progress, get harder, and move forward and evolve themselves, that they're going to be back expected to do academics like they did prior to the pandemic. Some students have had a really hard time with that. They've become overwhelmed. They become overwhelmed with just being back in with their peers, back in the building, interacting with people. They're concerned about society. They're concerned about where the world is headed. They're concerned about what the world is leaving them as they get older. And as they do that, they become overwhelmed. And we're seeing more diagnoses with anxiety and depression, hearing more things with folks with problems with concentration and attention, motivation, procrastination, that they're just struggling to really get going. And it's not, like I said, it's not all teens. We have teens out there who virtual school was great for them. They could get on, work at their own pace, get things done, and they did well academically. They just missed the social life. They missed being with their friends. They missed being part of activities. For a lot of our teens, they're learning to drive. They're learning to get jobs. They're learning to play sports. They're playing sports. They're doing theater. They're doing musicians. They're doing artistic stuff. And when we took them out of school, all of those things stopped. And some of what we hear from teens now is they're concerned that those things are going to be shut down again, that their sports are going to be stopped again, that things that they enjoy, their connections with their peers, are going to be shut down again. And that loss of those connections, they were staying connected online as much as they could, trying to support each other. I heard a lot from kids about concerns of parents losing jobs. That was a huge thing for a lot of our individuals, as families that food became an issue, but where their family's going to be able to get it, where the grocery store is going to have supplies, were people in their family going to get sick, were they going to get sick, were they going to die? They pay attention to all of those things. And because teens are going from this very concrete level of thinking to a more abstract level of thinking, they were able to think more, ask questions, and understand some of the impact that the pandemic had on everyone. And they are self-centered to some degree because that's part of their adolescent development. That kind of was a vulnerability for them also with the people in their lives, because they were focused on their own well-being and they wanted to be with their friends, and the world was a terrible place for them. You're looking at the other things at home. When they were home, maybe everybody was at home, and tensions rise when everybody gets at home. Maybe some people were being yelled at. Maybe there was abuse. Maybe there's addictions in the family. Maybe they started using drugs and alcohol as a means to cope. Maybe they were cutting to cope. Maybe they were doing other behaviors that were not very healthy, maybe eating disordered type behaviors, binging, using food as a means to cope, exercising as a means to cope to an extent that it was too much. Everybody was experiencing something different, and not all of their coping styles ended up being a benefit for them. We've seen, especially in the information from the CDC, the teens talked about the fact that half of them that were surveyed felt like they were emotionally abused during the time of the main pandemic, with people, cussing at them, swearing at them, and then putting them down or making them feel belittled. There was a smaller portion of them that felt like they were being physically abused during that time from all of the stress that was going on in their lives. I think that families were put in situations and have continued to be put in situations because we're still going through this time period, potential of losing homes. They are loosening up a lot of things. People can go back out to restaurants. You can go to the amusement park. You're going to be able to take a vacation if that's what you enjoy doing. You can go to the beach. Lots of different areas have different restrictions. There's still restrictions to get on planes, trains, and those kind of things that young people are aware of. But I think families are looking at, how do we transition back to something that looks a little bit more pre-pandemic? Teens were excited to get back into school, most of them, not all of them, to be able to see their friends, to not have to be at school on Zoom. Zoom, I've had teens request to come see me in the office. They feel exhausted and burnt out from using Zoom. Being on Zoom and that type of academic learning for them all day is tolling on their brain. It does make them feel exhausted. It does work on their level of concentration. So as much as we can get them off of social media a little bit, helping them understand that not everything they read and see on TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, or whatever social media that they look at, not everything is 100% accurate, and helping them navigate that is really important also, because they're seeing things that our adults are doing, and they're expecting and saying, well, we're expected to behave a certain way, we're expected to do things a certain way, we're expected to manage ourselves better, but there's a lot of adults in our world who are not manage themselves very well either in the public eye. So some other things that I'm thinking, I'm trying to think of all the things I want to make sure that I touch on in terms of the disruption to their lives. Getting back into the school system, there was an increase in academic stress and testing, taking tests. A lot of young people missed those key developmental things. We had seniors who didn't get to have a regular graduation. We had seniors who did not get to have proms or formals. We had college students who didn't get to have graduations. We had seniors graduating and started college virtually. Some folks who started college as freshmen actually were in dorm rooms doing virtual and going out to get food and then coming back. They weren't allowed to do a lot that was social. And it all depended on what state you were in the United States for how that looked. And I think a lot of our teens that we deal with in the area, a lot of them started college in a virtual situation. A lot of them graduated, did not get to finish sports seasons, did not get to finish activities at school, did not get to experience some of the normal rites of passage of their adolescence, which they will take with them long term down into their future and how they see the world, how they see the adults in their life, and how they handle things. So now that we've had some folks, this year they're going to have a little bit more typical graduation. They're going to have a prom. They're going to have formals. They're going to have activities, which is really nice. A lot of the sports stuff was back in action. A lot of the fall sports activities that happened for young people, they had senior nights right away at the beginning of seasons. That way, if something happened that the sports season got canceled at some point because of the pandemic, they took care of the things that they knew that parents and teens wanted. A lot of teens are very concerned that we're going to have another outbreak that's going to cause things to shut down again, and it will disrupt their world. It will disrupt their parents' world. It will disrupt the entire world. They're concerned about inflation right now. They're concerned about the economy. They're concerned about what's happening in other countries and how all of this impacts us in the long run. And I think as adults, that listening ear, that understanding, knowing that they're dealing with all of these things as their brain is continuing to develop is important as we're working to help them understand their world, what's going on around them. So helping them learn to have some effective coping skills is going to be important. You want to, as much as you can with your teens, create that, okay, now you're back in school, there's time for homework, there's time for your social media, there's time for your friends, there's time to have a job. Help them get back into the routine of those normal rhythms of life where they can set up time to be with friends, where they can go and do things like go to the movie theater. Help them set up things that feel natural to them. If you notice that they're doing things like they're continuing to isolate themselves, if they're looking depressed to you, if they're saying things that they don't have any hope and that school is terrible and life is terrible, you may want to contact to get them in with somebody who is a counselor, to at least give them an additional ear to listen to. Because a lot of our folks feel like nobody understands them. They don't feel supported. Whereas the CDC also, in their information that they found that the folks who ended up becoming a little bit more resilient, part of what helped was that they had a good support system, that they have people who are willing to listen, people who help them feel supported, people who help them fit in, people who help them with whatever their academic struggles are. So if you're a parent and you know your person is struggling academically, to get caught back up, to get back up to speed where they need to be, certainly help them know when to ask for help with teachers or to ask you for help so that you can search for someone like a tutor for them. Or YouTube, there are lots of academic YouTube videos out there that you can recommend to them that they look at. Help them to be able to learn how to breathe, relax. Help them to become more involved in things in the community. Encourage them to get back out there, while at the same time understanding and saying to them, you can talk to them. How's this pandemic affecting you? How are you doing at this point? You can talk to them about the fact that you may have your own thoughts on the pandemic. You can talk to them about the things that concern you in a productive way, and to talk about what you're doing to take care of yourself. I'm going to tell you, as a grown-up, they're watching you. So take care of yourself. Take care of your own mental health at the same time. Do things as a family. That's one of the things that was a positive from the main part of the pandemic that I heard from people, not everyone, some people, that they did activities together. They intentionally watched movies together. They intentionally had meals together. They intentionally played games together. They got outside and took walks when they could do that. They build different bonds in a different relationship because they were forced to in many ways. It helped families to look at slowing down a little bit. We had some teens feeling very overwhelmed because they were trying to hold jobs. They were working to get into the best schools possible for college. They were working on, they might be doing dance, they might be doing a sport, they might be doing something dramatic, they might be doing chorus, they might be doing band, they might be doing a combination of activities of which they were on the go all the time, and families were on the go all the time. The pandemic allowed some families to take a step back and reprioritize what they needed in their life, and to recognize we do need to slow down a little bit. We do need to have things in our life, but let's not have too many things going on. We've seen a great deal of increase in self-harm, suicidal ideation, and alcohol and drug use among our young people as a means of coping with things that they feel are outside of their control, with dealing with things that overwhelm them, that they're not sure what to do with. The numbers presenting at emergency facilities, like your ER, they're seeing sometimes 3 or more people who are presenting for services on a daily basis. That's a big increase from previous years and previous time periods. We have a lot more young people in crisis, teaching them how to regulate their emotions, in that you're regulating your own, that you're very aware and mindful of, okay, I'm getting really upset about this. This is all stressing me out. I've got to tune out some of the TV news. I've got to get myself off social media so that I can show my kids how to detach from some of this stuff, how to distance myself a little bit from the things that are stressful. Get your own exercise, paint, learn a new language, do something different, teach them how to become more centered, more balanced. Help them understand that they do need to be getting adequate sleep at night, because that was another thing I heard from a lot of teachers, parents, students during the pandemic, was that, they knew they had to be online by a certain time. A lot of people were up late gaming with their friends, watching movies, watching YouTube videos, watching TikTok videos, that then they weren't getting quality sleep. So then they were irritable and moody, having more emotional outbursts. We were seeing a lot more low frustration tolerance. We're still seeing that. The number of fights in schools is getting a little bit better. It's decreasing some. But when we first went back to school in the fall, I was hearing from students that school just really felt unsafe because there were so many people fighting and so many people arguing and not getting along, and that the choice to working things out was everybody was getting physical with each other or threatening each other. So there was a lot of those things going on that we've been dealing with too as the kids have transitioned back into school. It's been overwhelming for not just those students, but it's also overwhelming for our educators. And to remember that everybody is adjusting and making adjustments as we go. Hopefully, as we get down the road, we're going to see that young people are getting back more involved in community activities, that we start to see less depression, that we start to see them connected, that we start to see them expressing that life is getting a little bit better for them, that life is getting better for their families. Some families have been able to get back into the workforce. Some families have had to deal with the death of loved ones, and there's still concerns about that as a new variant comes out all the time, and making sure that the loved ones around them are as protected as can be. So other things that we can do to help them out, help them with breaks from social media stuff, because that became a big way for people to cope during the pandemic, is to be into everything electronic that they could be. Help them kind of take a little break from that now, get involved in some other things. As an adult, instill hope for them. Give them the positive stuff about, we've come a long way through this pandemic. We're getting back to the things of life that we enjoy. Yes, we may get sick, hopefully not as bad. That we help them with, okay, now you're back in school. Let's figure out how to manage your time. Let's figure out how to prioritize things. Let's figure out what are the things that are triggers for you. Is it academic stress? Is it stress of the school environment? Is it being with so many people? Because when you take people and you isolate them and then you put them back in with large crowds of people, like at school, you're going to have social anxiety, and you're going to have fears of, okay, there's too many people. It's too peoply. It's too much. I've heard that from teenagers, and I will tell you, you just kind of got to give them some space when they get home from school. Don't let them isolate too much. That's going to be their desire because they're teenagers, and teenagers want to isolate and have all their private space in the world. Have them set some daily, weekly goals for themselves. What do you want to accomplish tomorrow? Where do you want to be at a week from now? What kind of things do you want to be doing a week from now that you're not doing right now? And it could be kids are school avoided, some of them. It might be, I need to get up every day on time, get dressed, get on the bus, get to school, get into school, finish my day, not be calling people to come and get me, be able to make it through the whole day successfully. Maybe that's a goal that they have. Teach them how routines work. Encourage some exercise. Encourage eating well and balanced. I know that a lot of folks worry about not having access to food, and we see it all the time still now. Shelves are empty. Inflation is causing that there's some supply chain issues, that things are more expensive to purchase. So people are having to decide, how much money do we put towards this? How much money do we put towards that? People are refocusing their finances toward those things that they have to pay for. Food, shelter, medical care, clothing, the essentials, and that sometimes the fun things don't always happen. So I tell parents, I'm like, while they're getting back into things, you don't necessarily have to spend a ton of money to do it. Just get them more active out there, being around their friends, just enjoying their life. Be able to help them listen and help them problem solve through whatever is going on. For parents a lot, for adults a lot, I tell people there's the 50% rule. They hear 50% of what you say and the other 50% goes out your ear. So you want to be short and sweet and to the point when you're talking to them about things, especially when they're stressed. You want to come to be passionate about what they're interested in, know what they're interested in, make time for them. Look at how you're communicating. Are you nagging? Are you lecturing? Are you yelling? Are you stressed? How are you communicating with them? How are you coming across from them? Seize the moment with them and help them learn how to avoid some distractions. And a reminder, have them get good sleep, always. I want you to remember this is a season for them. This is a season for all of us. Not everything that's happening now. Things are changing. We're not in the same position we were at this time, March 2020. March to April 2020. April 2020, we were all locked down at home. We had essential people going to work every day who did not know what to expect. They were stressed out, because people were stressed out coming to get goods. Hospital staff were stressed out. People were getting sick. People didn't know what it was going to happen. There was so much uncertainty, and there's still a lot of uncertainty in the world. But our teens, they need us to be there for support. They need us to put our best foot forward on their behalf. If they need counseling, please reach out to a counselor for them. I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope that there was something that you got out of this talk that will help you in working with the teens in your life to understand maybe where they're coming from in terms of development, why stress affects them differently, and how to help them get back to some normal or more typical level of functioning and coping.
Hi, Susan. I want to thank you very much for being here. We have not had any questions come in, some comments about a good job and great information. So happy to share that with you.
Thank you.
And certainly appreciate your time and your sharing and preparation for giving this talk and the information that you've put together. I think it was very informative.
All right. Thank you.